Good afternoon or evening or morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the day 2 session of the 5th Experts Workshop of the Organization of World Heritage Cities Asia Pacific Regional Secretariat. My name is Hyeonji Oh, the Regional Coordinator of OWHC-AP. First of all, please let me introduce the team OWHC-AP. Mr. Daesik Kim. He's the team leader of OWHC-AP, and he is the one who directs all programs and projects of OWHC-AP. Let me introduce Ms. Young Lee, program specialist of OWHC-AP. She is in charge of all PR projects, including Heritage Digital Gallery. Before we start, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for all of you to participate in the workshop with such a short notice. As our World Heritage Cities are facing the biggest challenge, COVID-19, I thought it is our mission to have an open discussion about this pandemic and its impact to our World Heritage Cities. In that regard, we have set the topic of workshop as New Normal Life in World Heritage Cities of Asia Pacific. And today's session will be discussing about challenges and perspective of tourism in World Heritage Cities in era of COVID-19, including 3 cities reports from our sincere member cities. Before we get started, I'd like to have a little summary from yesterday's workshop session. Dr. Shabnam Minalu Delu, the Associate Professor and Director of Athabasca University Heritage Resources Management Program and Historical Resources Intern Program. I think actually she's right here. Hello? Hi. She has shared the thought regarding the local community and all stakeholders assess the impacts of this global pandemic well and take this time as the opportunity to build their capacity. And she also mentioned about her educational program for heritage management in her university. Thank you. And Ms. Aparna Tandon, Senior Program Leader of First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis and Sustaining Digital Heritage. She listed some of key impacts of ongoing pandemic on World Heritage Cities and shared 7-step strategies to manage the crisis for the World Heritage Cities and promote early discovery, build disaster resilience. And we have had 3 city reports. First one was from Korea. Mr. Juan Carlo, he introduced the pandemic situation of general Korea's situation. And we have had the mayor of Kandy, Sri Lanka, and he reported his city's situation. And last we have had the Luang Prabang, Laos. The representative from Laos also presented the current situation of pandemic to our World Heritage Cities. For today's session, please allow me to introduce Ms. Fergus Maclaren, the President of ICOMOS International Cultural Tourism Committee. Hello, Mr. Maclaren.
Nice to see you again. Nice to see you.
Okay, if it's okay, can you take the floor from me, please?
I'm happy to. I'd love to be there. I would love to be there for real, but I'll do it virtually for you. Okay, thank you. First off, Hyeonji, very nice to see you again, and thank you and Elena and your team for the great organizational job that you've done. I had a chance to view the session last night, and I was really impressed by the work that you'd undertaken to prepare for this, and I think that it's really important, especially in terms of the choices that you've made with regard to the focus on tourism that is certainly affecting many of our member OWHC cities in this time of the pandemic globally, not just in the Asia Pacific, but around the world. One of the things I wanted to note was that in the opening presentation last night, Lee Manitis, who's the acting Secretary General for the OWHC, remarked, about a year ago, we were talking about over-tourism. We were talking about concerns related to too many people, too much traffic, the impacts in our cities. And look where we are a year after that. And certainly we've seen a strong, transformation on what We depend on what we have with tourism, and certainly in terms of how we need to sort of deal with it in order to not only bring it back, but as you've heard in many circumstances, to bring it back better. And so what I'm hoping is that for the next presentations that you'll be hearing, we'll be having 2 expert presentations and then 3 city presentations. And these 2 expert presentations will be from my friend and colleague, Dr. Hyungyu Park, who's a senior lecturer at Middlesex University. And Hyungyu will talk to you about the challenges of tourism in World Heritage Cities in Asia Pacific in the era of COVID-19. Second presentation, the face will be familiar. It will be me. You get to hear me talk even more. And specifically, I'll be talking on systems, supply chains, and sustainability, the challenge for post-COVID tourism recovery and rejuvenation of Asian World Heritage cities. We'll have a 10-minute break from those first 2 presentations. And then we'll have 3 city reports from Gyeongju, Denpasar, and Vigan. And then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And we've already had some questions that have been posed by members of the panel. I'd ask only 2 things, is that if you're not presenting, if you can keep your speaker on mute, just to respect the other speaker's time and presentation. And also, can you please hold your time? Hyungyu and myself have 25 minutes, and the other speakers have 15 minutes each. And I will give you a gentle reminder. And if not, I'll give you a strong reminder. And if not, there's a trapdoor underneath your seat. And I'll happily pull that lever if you go longer than your time. So that being said, Hyungyu, would you like to start?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Hyungyu Park. I am a senior lecturer in tourism studies at Middlesex University, UK. And I'm very honored to take part in today's session. So team of OWHC-AP, thanks for providing me with this wonderful opportunity. My topic today is the challenges of tourism in the AP region in an era of COVID-19. I'm going to start with the devastating impact of COVID-19 on the global tourism industry, and then more specifically, the impact of COVID-19 on tourism and heritage in the Asia-Pacific region. And then finally, I would like to draw your attention to reconceptualizing heritage tourism as a transformative force for recovery and resilience after COVID-19 in our region. Tourism was worth almost $9 trillion in 2019, accounting for 7% of global trade. International tourist arrivals reached 1.5 billion, and 1 in every 10 people was employed in tourism industry globally. The figure was 3 times bigger than agriculture. And then there was an increasing popularity of heritage tourism all across the globe. So a lot of popular heritage cities and towns suffered from over-tourism issues. Over-tourism was possibly the most debated and topical issues in both the academics and practitioners since 2017. The last 2 workshops by OWHC-AP and OWHC last year were also centered around the issues of over-tourism. This shows how grave and challenging over-tourism issues we faced over the last couple of years. And then the detrimental impact of over-tourism on environment, culture, led to increasing focus on sustainability, but a struggle with making a balance between development and conservation in World Heritage cities. During COVID-19, economically, international tourist numbers dropped by 58 to 78%. And the visitor spending also showed a dramatic decrease from 1.5 trillion in 2019 to between 310 and 570 billion. And over 1 million direct jobs are put at risk. This is the recent statistics published by UNWTO. This is more than 3 times the loss during the global economic crisis of 2009. So it seems to be not an over-exaggeration to state COVID-19 has crushed tourism industry. COVID-19 has also put an increasing pressure on heritage culture, as well as cultural and social fabric of a society. Tourism is an important economic source for conserving heritage in many heritage sites and cities. So decreased tourism has led to poor heritage conservation and management, without doubt. And heritage organizations, both national and local, in both the developed and developing countries, has been struggling with a lack of funding, support, and a shortage of staff. So, in a nutshell, over-tourism has been turned into under-tourism in the AP region. And then there's a question we need to think about: which one is better? Well, possibly neither one is good. And then now I'm going to draw your attention to tourism in the AP region during COVID-19. Compared to Europe and North America, Asia has been regarded as the best region in dealing with the pandemic in terms of the containment of virus. But given the dependency on tourism in this region, probably COVID-19 has made the highest impact in this region in relative and absolute terms. So a dramatic decrease in international tourist arrivals. For example, in April, nearly 99% decrease in Southeast Asia. And then there's a prediction that as much as 80% for all of 2020. Because this region has got actually some countries which has got too much economic dependency on tourism, this dramatic decrease in international tourist arrivals have made quite destructive impact on their economy. And mass tourism destinations are particularly badly affected. So maybe this is time for focusing on more small scale and heritage and culture-based tourism experiences rather than relying on the volume of tourists in this region. And travel bubble agreement is a bilateral arrangement which allows movement between selected countries with low infection numbers. So in this region, for example, between New Zealand and Australia, Indonesia and Singapore, between Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan, and South Korea and China for business and official travel has been enabled. And then this has actually sustained some form of tourism activities, but actually still there's a huge impact, negative impact caused by COVID-19. But I would like to think about some positive aspects of this crisis on tourism as well. Through COVID-19, there has been a recognition of a home as part of a tourism setting. Tourism has been traditionally perceived as actually something distinct from everyday life. So tourism was something, extraordinary. Tourism was a search for out of everyday context or experiences. So there has always been clear distinction between home and tourism. But however, through this period, the significance of home, everyday life, has been come up with actually places or settings of tourism experiences. As a consequence of this, nature, heritage culture-focused tourism experiences have become more recognized. And then because of this interest in the significance of home, and then the incorporation home as part of tourism setting, and also with international traveling restrictions, domestic tourism has boomed, which helps to enhance a sense of national local identity and emotional connections. So, for example, revenge tourism is a new term which originated in Chinese context, but now through Indonesia, Singapore, and India, this type of tourism, lots of nationals take domestic travels as a way to take a revenge against the lockdowns and traveling restrictions have become quite popular. And through this, also, there has been some evidence of restructuring of tourism employment. So some tourism workers, such as Bali or Siem Reap, actually, have shown they have turned to agriculture or craftsmanship. So in Bali, lots of tourism workers have gone back to seaweed farming or art and craft sector as well. So this shows locals should not depend wholly on tourism, and then there's a critical need to diversify their income. So again, total dependency on tourism, particularly economically, is not really sustainable. And then now there has been more increasing focus on digital technology, and then there have been some attempts to renovate and digitize the operation systems in tourism businesses and hotels, and then also in many cultural institutions and heritage settings, contactless and virtual reality capacities have been increased. Just briefly, I just want to show how tourism, particularly in China, has evolved during COVID-19 as one example. So at the beginning, all domestic and all international entries were quarantined for 14 days and very few international flights in and out. But through summer, again, through this recognition of everyday life and home as part of tourism setting and experience, the summer bounce back was quite fast, from 15 to 40% occupancy in the budget or mid-range hotel sector. Then this was a result from young people taking more domestic travels. So young people took 60% of the bookings, single or middle class people taking short-haul domestic flights and trains, but they traveled generally to large urban destinations, and then a lot of tourism was centered around friends and family tourism. But then again, I would like to emphasize a lot of heritage sites and cities were one of the main attractions for these domestic travelers. So movement within China also tended to be shorter rather than longer distances. So people preferred traveling, within shorter distances, but younger people took part in more heritage tourism experiences. 268 World Heritage Sites are included in the region, and then this comes up as nearly 24% of all the sites. So most of these sites closed or, had difficulties of keeping social distancing. And without doubt, tourism crisis takes toll on heritage sites and practices. But maybe this is an opportunity to scale up infrastructure, archaeological projects, including excavation and restoration, and some new urban planning strategies, and reposition heritage for communities. A lot of recent research before COVID-19 have proven that visiting heritage helps people to deal with stress and anxiety. So again, the healing properties of heritage has been re-emphasized during COVID-19 as a power and transformative force for recovery and resilience through and after COVID-19. So we also must recognize this healing properties and socio-psychological dimension of heritage in our region. And then this can be a very important understanding of revaluing heritage within our geographical context. And heritage should be perceived as an effective means to develop alternative forms of tourism development and bring in social and environmental sustainability as well as economic sustainability. And then it should also invite more government funding and support. Finally, for our shared future, I would like to just emphasize several key points. Again, I mentioned about too much economic dependency on tourism in this region, and particularly some mass tourism destinations. When we discussed about over-tourism issues, there was always a suggestion to restructure tourism or to actually, take a new approaches to tourism experiences as a small scale or more qualitative. However, nothing significantly changed. And then maybe this crisis is an opportunity to make new and real changes. So too much focus on economic impact of the pandemic on tourism in the region should be also replaced by more balanced approach to tourism and sustainability. As a tourism academic, every time crisis hit the world, tourism academics are very keen on actually, evaluating the devastating economic impact of these crises on tourism. But then again, I feel now in the academia and also in the practitioners, we need to look at more than economic impact of the pandemic, more qualitative and also culture and society-based impacts of the pandemic should be gauged. And tourism and heritage in the region need to show their capacities for recovery and resilience after COVID-19, particularly drawing attention to the healing properties of heritage setting. So collaborations across national and regional level are key in reviving and renovating the practices of tourism and heritage management in the region. And more importantly, sharing some protocols and platforms and some practices between the members of, the OWHC-AP will be a valuable lesson to be learned from each other. And then we can always have that shared platform to make, our communication get going. So again, heritage tourism shouldn't be just about site-specific tourism experiences. Again, if our cities only focus on famous or popular heritage sites, then it will easily lead to over-tourism issues again. And then it will also end up mass tourism, phenomenon. So less number of tourists, but more spending tourists who are willing to make some contribution to the local economy and who prefer longer immersion into the local settings, who are willing to stay longer and to have interaction with the residents. And then in doing so, developing different themes or stories rather than site-specific promotion will be quite critical as well. And again, heritage tourism has got a, great future in investing in domestic market. Younger generations who were traditionally very passive recipient of heritage tourism have now shown more interest in heritage tourism experiences. Maybe not involuntarily during COVID-19, they couldn't really travel abroad. So they could only just travel within their own countries. So they have taken this chance to rediscover the values and the meanings of their country. So emotional connections to a nation or community-based participation will be really interesting theme. So this is our story. So instead of just promoting heritage sites for international audience, maybe now is time for us to reappreciate our connection with the past and roots. And then digital technology, investing in digital technology is also very critical in sustaining the values and appeals of heritage tourism, but at the same time to attracting younger generations. This is very important element. So digitizing heritage sites, such as live streaming or 3D, or developing a range of different apps or immersive applications, both VR or AR, and friendly and interesting tour guides, I mean virtual tour guides. All these things have hugely contributed to enhancing the appeal of heritage sites and cities in Western context. So I think investing in this part in our region will also lead to very positive consequences. Finally, I would like to emphasize we all are very desperate to go back to normal, but tourism doesn't need to go back to the same before the COVID-19. It could be much better. And then I cannot overemphasize that COVID-19 is a chance, a new opportunity to deal with some issues of tourism we have long had in our region. So please act now before mass tourism will be back at full capacity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hyungyu. That was great. If we can just share back or go back to, if you could release the share, Hyungyu, that'd be great.
Yep.
Okay. There you go. Thank you. That was great. Really, I like your thinking, especially the idea that, there's an English expression that you can make, you can use lemons to make lemonade. So it's one of those things where sometimes you have to take something unpalatable or something unexpected, and you can use that as an opportunity to change that and make something better. And so to that end, I really like the examples that you use because you really presented circumstances where, yes, we are in a position where economically there are ways that we are being affected across the visitor economy, but at the same time, there are ways to look at it and say, can we improve training? Can we restore the buildings? We don't have a lot of people at these sites. Can we clean them up? I mean, there's all kinds of things that resonates in terms of an opportunity. And I think that, especially for cities, which is so heavily trafficked at the best times, that's, this is an opportunity. And the other aspect is that, who would have thought that we would have had this kind of restart in tourism? The way we were going and the way we were spiraling down, that opportunity would have rarely or not at all presented itself. So this is the thing. It's that, it's a one-time chance perhaps to actually do something different. So thank you. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Now you get to hear even more from me. Lucky all of you. And let's just see. I will share my screen. And here we go. So here we are. So just to start off, the image that you see on the right, we talked about over-tourism before, and this is Quebec City on the top slide. And in fact, it's about a 3 or 4 minute walk from the OWHC Secretariat in Quebec, so not very far. The image below is what it looks like now. And so, even in the Secretariat City and in other places, there has been a big transformation, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, between the way that we used to view tourism and the way that it's actually performing on the ground right now. So what I wanted to do is that I'm glad for the points that Hyungyu raised, because this is an opportunity to do something complementary in terms of some of the ways and approaches you can use to, create recovery and rejuvenation within these individual destinations that are member cities of the OWHC. So I'll go through it, and you'll see some of the points I'm raising at the end that talk about systems, supply chains, and sustainability that can help in the recovery process. So this year in January, the UNWTO has what they call a tourism barometer that they use on a monthly, on an annual basis. And, where we were in January, tourism was growing worldwide from 4% in 2019 to 1.5 billion tourists overall. Asia Pacific was the second largest growth area after the Middle East. So again, big numbers and significant growth from the most populated region in the world. There was, of course, uncertainty surrounding Brexit. There were geopolitical and trade tensions, in part between some of the larger nations were having issues. I'm not going to mention their names. And then the global economic slowdown, which also affected growth because of those trade tensions. That being said, the United Nations World Tourism Organization forecasted a 3 to 4% growth in international tourism arrivals in 2020. So again, fairly consistent with the year before. Everything, full steam ahead, looking very positive. Tourism is going to increase. Everyone's very happy. In terms of pre-COVID tourism at World Heritage Sites, over-tourism was growing concern in large historic cities and high-profile World Heritage Sites. Here we have the Great Wall during Golden Week, and of course, many of us have seen photos like that before. And then in Barcelona at Park Güell, below in the image, tourists, your luxury trip is my daily misery. So again, in many cities, there were some serious conditions and impacts from the growing numbers of visitors and their environmental, social, and other impacts that were occurring there. The same visitor impact was affecting the physical integrity and presentation. Many of these cities that date back hundreds of years, they were built for these kinds of volumes of people, traffic, or evolutions of structures that were in them. So again, they were being impacted by this continuous monumental type of growth. There were major environmental impacts caused by the ever-expanding tourism industry, whether it was air pollution, water pollution, drawdown of energy, contribution to greenhouse gases and climate change. All these things are being concentrated in these large tourism cities. There were also issues with regard to visitors' inconsiderate behavior, affecting experiences and locals' quality of life. You have places like Venice and Florence in Italy, that started programs called Enjoy, Respect Venice and Enjoy, Respect Florence, because of the fact that visitor behavior was becoming untenable around the important monuments and cultural landscapes that were there in the individual cities. And they're trying to find ways to push back with social marketing campaigns to decrease these kinds of activities. You're also seeing significant economic leakage from destinations. There are, several instances where tourism operations, short-term rentals, businesses, and others were not leaving their revenues or incomes in the community. So there was an issue in terms of how was that community benefiting in some cases from the actual numbers of people who were visiting there. And finally, for the people who live there, or trying to live there, there's an increasingly unaffordable cost of living and limited housing options. So often in many cases, you had rental units, or the rental housing stock turned into short-term housing units. And it was getting unaffordable and impossible for people to actually live in these major tourism destinations, to live a day-to-day existence. Now, of course, COVID, as we all know, began in full in the middle of March. And you had a number of impacts that came as a result of that. International tourism arrivals dropped by 65% during the first half of 2020. This represented a loss, just for stats, of $440 million international arrivals and almost $500 billion in export revenues. This is globally. The projected return to 2019 levels in terms of tourism arrivals around the globe would take between 2.5 to 4 years. These are all estimates from the UNWTO. Millions of livelihoods were lost. And, with the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals were implemented 5 years ago, initiated 5 years ago, 2015. This is pushing back this ability to try and inculcate and reinforce sustainability measures across the economic, social, environmental, and cultural realms. Uniquely, though, one of the things that, as Hyungyu mentioned, was that there was a reflexive environmental quality improvement in local communities, in the sense that you started to see freer access around cities, so less traffic stress. You saw dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice. You saw better air quality in these large destinations that otherwise had, buses, taxis, etc. And so, there's actually, a good environmental return, environmental quality return. So in that end, this sort of touches on some of the key points, that there were some benefits that came from this lack of tourism in large World Heritage cities. So many of you have probably seen these maps. UNESCO, through its World Heritage Center, has created a COVID monitor. The countries in light blue are partially open. Canada and United States, because we're large, we think of a bigger size of the screen. But, there were an equal number who were closed, primarily in West Asia, South Asia, and also across Africa. And, there are a minimal number of sites, primarily in Europe, that were open. So, this is still the ongoing state for across 1,121 World Heritage Sites that are out there, and the majority of them, of course, being cultural sites, and many of them being urban or city-oriented sites. So again, this is still a key issue in terms of access and ability due to national measures or regional measures to go and actually visit and see and have a tourism experience at these sites. As I said, it could take about 2.5 to 4 years for it to recover. Now, in terms of the risks for tourism at World Heritage Cities, in the wake of this COVID pandemic, there is the economic risk of tourism never returning to the same levels of growth to sustain the local visitor economy. Of course, you've talked about a lot of investment, a lot of infrastructure, training, capacity, expected revenues. This is something that cities, in some cases, will have to prepare for. I mean, that might be a short-term reality, but it might even be long-term. This is something that you have to take as part of your economic analysis. There's a social risk, the loss of a key employment sector, and the ability to support others as part of that visitor economy. It's one of those things where if you're dependent upon it on a seasonal basis or an annual basis to create employment, to create other jobs in the sector, whether it's accommodations, infrastructure, amenities, or services, this is something that you can't plan for, and something where a section of your population is going to have to quickly find a way where they can support themselves and their families, their living standards, and their ability to remain in that community. From the environmental standpoint, there's a risk of the loss of biodiversity and having funds necessary to make necessary infrastructure improvements. This is more in the case at the beginning of protected areas, but in terms of necessary infrastructure improvements, cities, as you know, are complex entities, often requiring updating in terms of infrastructure services, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether it's roads. And, with a lower tax base, you'll have less resources that you're able to support the necessary infrastructure to support the existing population that lives there. And finally, there's a cultural risk of diminished revenues to preserve and maintain sites and the associated communities, landscapes, and traditions that support them. Again, we're talking cities that are hundreds of years old in many cases, and they have taken a bit of a battering as they've expanded and grown and dealt with huge populations. But again, less revenues means less opportunity potentially to preserve and maintain these sites and the traditional communities that live within them with the traditional crafts or intangible cultural heritage that they provide as part of that living experience in that place. Now, in terms of internal factors affecting tourism recovery, cities are missing the visitor economy, revenue, and taxes. We talked about that in the last slide in a number of instances. Considerable jobs will be lost, along with services and amenities. And this is, today I had a Destination Canada, our national marketing organization, had its annual sort of state of the country tourism system address this afternoon. And in that discussion, what they talked about was the fact that there are between 15 to 30% of existing tourism businesses across the country have closed. They're done. They're not going to be functioning anymore. So to that end, you've already seen the accompanying job loss that comes with the shuttering of those businesses. So we're not just talking about small businesses. We're talking about airlines that are releasing thousands of employees. We're talking about hotels that are shutting down. We're talking about cruise ship industries that we'll talk about a little bit later. Again, there's a whole range of people who are being impacted by this. At the same time, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned before, citizens may not miss the impacts of over-tourism. There's a chance now to go back and rediscover your city, to go to those places that your parents talked about, your grandparents talked about, to actually feel like you are part of that place, as opposed to just either a prop or someone who's just sidelined by whatever's been going down in the downtown historic cores of these places. So again, there's that important social impact of feeling more opportunities for participation. And finally, funds not being spent on tourism can be reallocated elsewhere. In terms of the tourism infrastructure, there are certain things, grand projects that have been proposed, but this is a chance to look at that money that was going to be spent on those types of tourism type focused amenities and look at something that's more community facing, but that eventually might have tourism benefits, like a public transit system improvement, or like cleaning up the city in some parts, or infrastructure repairs, all those things that help the residents who live there, but in over time will also benefit the flow of tourists that come to that city. The external factors affecting tourism recovery: international and even domestic travel, though possible, will remain a hassle. This is a problem now where Hyungyu was telling me she's in quarantine right now. And so she'll have your two-week adventure in her hotel room. And, she's not the only one who's been experiencing that when you do international travel. And this is one of the things where people will be, frustrated from a testing standpoint, but also a quarantine standpoint. In one instance, a country in West Africa, I was told by a friend that you have to be tested a few days before, and then you have to pay $150 US to be tested at the airport in that West African country. And if you test positive, you're imprisoned for 2 weeks in a hospital and a hotel room that you have to pay for. So needless to say, that's not a very positive way to support tourism. And going on to that, there are countless forms, quarantines, the need for COVID-19 tests, and the risk of being stranded will all discourage foreign travel. Again, think of the cruise ships in March where you saw people hanging out the windows waiting to be rescued or waiting to be let go in Yokohama or other parts of the Asia Pacific, trying to leave their ships. Again, people are very wary of being away from their families, away from their home countries. And to build on that, some prominent sectors like cruise may never or not again regain their economic stature. This is a shipbreaking yard in Asmara, Turkey, that has seen in the past 2-3 months a 35% increase in the number of cruise ships that are being broken up. And so you're already seeing, a change in what is a major industry for many port cities, World Heritage port cities that are already had used cruise as one of their bases, and now they're going to see a drop back of that industry because of certain concerns that have been evolving around it. And I think the other thing to remember, and this is something where we've seen a bunch of pandemics or health questions and issues over the past 15 years. Think of SARS, think of MERS, think of Ebola, think of H1N1. To be honest, COVID-19 is just, another in a series of really unfortunate, tragic types of pandemics that have been circulating in different parts of the world. But, at the same time, I think that it's important to not lose focus of the fact that the bigger long-term change will be climate change, especially if you're located in a seaside or maritime World Heritage site. You really have to be concerned in terms of how those rising sea levels and how other factors are going to be affecting your city, particularly, over time, 10 years, 15 years or longer. And how do you plan for that? And how do you adapt or mitigate those circumstances that will eventually affect your city and tourism? Now, with that being said, the organization World Heritage Cities and its partners are responding. The OWHC had recommended operational guidelines for member cities that was developed by Matthias Ripp, who's the manager of the Europe and North America program, and also Brian Smith from the UK. And it's a really useful, downloadable guideline for sustainable cultural tourism, particularly in this era of the pandemic, and I recommend that you download it if you have the opportunity. I'm also part of UNESCO Task Force on Culture, Tourism, and COVID-19 that deals with recovery, resiliency, and rejuvenation. And specifically, we're working with ICROM and IUCN and ICOMOS are working together as partners with the UNESCO World Heritage Center to basically focus on those aspects from a regional basis and a thematic basis, how to deal with the COVID-19 issues that are specifically affecting World Heritage properties, including World Heritage cities. The UNWTO recently released its ALULA framework for inclusive community development through tourism. So again, looking at a more community-based or community-facing approach as countries, cities, and regions try to rebuild their tourism visitor economy. So again, a very useful document to quote. And finally, two things for the ICOMOS International Committee on Cultural Tourism Committee, which I am the president of. We're in the process of updating the draft International Sustainable Cultural Tourism Charter. And again, it was last updated 20 years ago. So we want it now in its updating to better reflect more risk-based approaches to climate change, pandemics, natural disasters and conflicts, many of the things that are affecting tourism right now. And as Lee mentioned last night, we are also in the process of entering into an arrangement with the OWHC to help develop some sustainable tourism responses and also sentiment indexes to help OWHC member cities to plan and recover their tourism sectors in a way that is more reflective of the needs of both the community, visitors, and the operators and government officials that are involved. So again, more information on that will be forthcoming over the coming month or so. Now, the United Nations had a broad-based response to tourism's COVID impacts. And this was from the report in September. And, it was, in terms of this is to start this discussion, they came up with 5 key points. One is to mitigate the socioeconomic impacts of the crisis. In many instances, we've seen this with support funds or support programs to help those people who have been either lost their jobs or been displaced out of their places of employment, to build resilience across the entire tourism value chain. If you're not able to support the actual tourism industry or sector, what other ways can your products or services be used within the overall economy? To maximize the use of technology in the tourism sector, a lot of that has involved the use of big data, but also ways you can use artificial and virtual reality and different technological tools to display your city virtually and to have people explore and understand the culture and heritage of your place. To promote sustainability and green growth, again, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, and to foster partnerships to enable tourism to further support the SDGs. Again, because the SDGs are a UN program, this is a way to not only do so as an individual entity, but with UN partners that are working in the Sustainable Development Goal field, along with the national partners or countries that are the leads for achievement against the individual targets. Now, when you start looking at a systemic approach to recovery, one of the ways you can do so is to implement the 5 Ps to embed purpose and deliver value for a World Heritage Cities tourism renewal. I use the image on the right because, of course, it's a little bit far-fetched, but it's it's a classic idea of where you might have a historic waterfront, but then you have the big modern city sort of being built up in the background. And there are 5 points that were raised by McKinsey that I adopted when it came to this idea of a systemic approach. And this is the portfolio strategy and products being the first in terms of what are you actually promoting or what are you actually selling in terms of your tourism product for a World Heritage, an AP World Heritage City that, is not only been doing so in the past 10, 15, 20 years, but at the same time, what are the new forms of tourism, the new ways of seeing, the new ways of experiencing a place, whether it's virtually, whether it's real time, or, emphasizing more intangible cultural heritage or authenticity. The second point is people and culture. And that's a twofold aspect. One is, how do you bring more people into the tourism process as the storytellers, as the persons who create experiences, as the persons who are there to help be part of the overall welcome presence within your city. And at the same time, training, because this is an opportunity right now for, if people do have time on their hands, there are various courses that are online or training institutions that are there to help augment and build up those skills that perhaps the opportunity wasn't there in the past. Third of all, processes and systems. One of the things that I've argued with regard to many of these ancient cities is that there are processes and systems that could be applied to better flow people through that place. There are directional issue opportunities. There's use of technology. There's use of monitoring. There's ways to really improve the way that you can have people exist and participate in your World Heritage City, but at the same time, in a way that is supported by a digital backbone or fabric that you're starting to see in many places, especially in Korea, which has a very strong digital network across the country. Performance metrics. Again, we talked about data, and now there are many different ways to capture it through various kinds of platforms, through your mobile phones, through registration, through all kinds of other activities. So the question is, how are you capturing that data? How is it being used? And how is it helping to inform you as a municipal authority or government or entity to let you know how best to direct tourists, monitor tourism, but also those areas that could potentially need improvement or reinforcing because of the visitor numbers that place. And finally, positions and engagements. So this is, where do you position yourself within the overall tourism region, within your country, and overall globally? How do you position yourself, and how do you engage with other places? Many of you have thankfully chosen to partner with the organization World Heritage Cities, and this is a way of engaging because of the fact that you're able to learn from one another and your experiences, what works, what doesn't work, but also ways that you hadn't perhaps thought of before in terms of being able to pivot or find ways to maintain some sort of economic balance and leverage that perhaps you hadn't thought of before because the circumstance where you are or the opportunity to hadn't been there to discuss these kinds of positions and engagements. The second point is to develop and improve the visitor economy supply chain. And one of the things that I'm thinking now, and this speaks back to what we were saying about experience, visit, respect Venice. And one of the things is that when you're doing planning and other sorts of initiatives, how do you find a way to have a community first or community facing approach? What are those things that you have? You're going to have limited funds in future moving forward. What are those things that you have that you're going to be able to basically support not only the communities that actually live there full time, but the tourists will be able to benefit from as well, whether it's a theater, whether it's a green space, whether it's a transportation hub, all these things, it's going to how you focus your investments. Second point is determine where goods and services can be sourced locally. This is especially so for operators who come from elsewhere, be it on cruise ships or buses or a certain other sort of operators who might be there in that community. Is there a way you can better engage people within your local geographic area or region to provide food, services, products, etc.? All those things that would be lower cost and also have a lower ecological footprint at the same time. The third element is to identify where future visitors will be coming from. The visitors that you had in the past who were there during the mass tourism times, if they see that the opportunities aren't necessarily there, or their country is not open to your country. We're talking about bubbles. We're talking about other sorts of transitions from places where your visitors are coming from. It's a really important part from a visitor supply standpoint to identify what the future trends are, the demographics, and the regions and what they hope to experience when they're there. And this is the fourth point, is that you need to focus on providing attractions and services that are appropriate for that market. Again, you're talking about heritage cities. They've been there for a long time. They have a certain sort of face and they have a certain structure and layout to them. But again, how are you conveying this to the new audiences and the newer expectations that they have for more experiential, culturally oriented, traditional, authentic oriented focus? So again, that's part of your product development side. Fifth, we're talking about scalability. If you're already dealing with elements where you have a certain level of visitation and it's shrunk completely, how do you scale that back up? Obviously, you're not going to be starting your tourism industry in your World Heritage City back immediately, but there are going to be ways that you can scale up in certain ways. And what does that look like from a planned standpoint and incremental aspects? And finally, one of the things that's really important is to support the creation of a strong data infrastructure. As I mentioned, I think this is one of the successes of a place like Korea or Singapore or China or other countries in the region. One of their key strengths is their ability to rely upon a strong internet backbone. The devices are there, 5G, the Internet of Things. All these elements play into a stronger way that you can both communicate in between your individual partners and operators and individuals, visitors, etc., and also how you can market as well and how you can present your site. So again, one of these key things, if you're talking about investment infrastructure, one of the key elements is a strong data infrastructure. And I'd say that, thankfully for Asia and Pacific, many of the leaders there figured this is one of the keys to encouraging economic growth and development. Finally, one of the key things is to apply sustainability as the key driver. Again, the SDGs were inculcated in 2015, and there are 3 key targets out of the 165 that are out there, represented by the 17 goals. And these are SDG target 8.9, to promote sustainable tourism, which creates jobs, promotes local culture and products. So again, focus on the local, the authentic, all these things that are appropriate right now in this COVID era. The second is 12B, to monitor sustainable development impacts for sustainable tourism. So again, all those things that you say you're going to be doing in 8.9, how does it make sense and how does it resonate in terms of the, you're using data, you're using assessments, this sentiment index that I just talked about a few slides back. How are you assessing how you're doing and how you can improve? And finally, attached to these two, and because you are World Heritage Cities, how do you protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage? This isn't specific to World Heritage, of course, but it's really important to recognize what are the roles you're undertaking to protect your most valuable resource for marketing purposes outside of World Heritage City in order to sustain its longevity for a place that's been there for hundreds of years or longer. For your reference, the UNWTO has created a Tourism for SDGs platform, and there are many good examples and reference points and information there that would recommend that you visit the site, tourismforsdgs.org, and it's a really useful site for those who are cities that really want to encourage more sustainability within their overall day-to-day operations and practices. Finally, it can be argued that Asia has fared much better than the rest of the world in its COVID response. We've heard about the bubbles being created between Hong Kong and Singapore that have unfortunately been delayed until the spring. But there was that initiative there, and Korea was doing very well for a while, certainly with China also, and a number of countries, and Japan, and then many countries are trying to really initiate leading measures to try and reduce the potential spread of COVID and expansion of cases that we're seeing in other parts of the world, like Canada, the United States, and Europe. And I think that, it's one thing, it's one of the positives that you can work from. That being said, tourism for Asian World Heritage Cities will be different post-COVID, no doubt. The way that, you take time to build back confidence, to have that vaccine regime in place, and to make sure that there's a level platform between countries. It's really important to understand that you need to have some, these factors are necessary in order to restart tourism. And the types of tourism that you have there will not be so much mass oriented. They might be more experiential, different sorts of markets, different age groups, demographics. So again, how does that re-envision itself in the new wave of tourism post-COVID? And that being said, with that, you'll have to have important, if not uncomfortable discussions on how tourism can improve. Like I said, you don't always get this kind of opportunity to step back, reflect, see what was working, see what could be improved, and, see what your citizens think, because, they have to live in your city. Tourists can come and go, but it's the citizens that have to deal with the aftermath. And hopefully it will become more positive over time, rather than perhaps some of the impressions that you were getting from tourism in the past. And I think that when you are developing recovery approaches, you should do so in a way that improves the systems, supply chains, and sustainability for your place. All these elements are part of what governments do. All these elements are things that government plays an important role in from a leadership standpoint, from a planning standpoint, and from a management standpoint. All these things are ways that you can improve the functional and the foundational aspects of tourism in your community. And it's important to recognize that recovery and rejuvenation will take time. As I mentioned, the UNWTO said it could take 2.5 to 4 years to get back to 2019 levels, if that's where you want to get back to. And realize that all the efforts you're making now as a city or a municipal entity, it's not going to happen right away. And you have to keep working at it, building on the good work that you're doing, and build back better, as you say. And finally, as you're doing this planning and as you're building back better, remember that the bigger future issue will be climate change. Don't lose sight of that. Remember that, there will be a vaccine eventually. And yes, there may be other pandemics coming in future, but climate change will be with us, and it's not going to be improving in the very short term. So any planning or infrastructure improvements you plan on making, particularly from a touristic standpoint, try and ensure that they find some ways of addressing climate change. So that being said, 감사합니다. My Korean is okay. Thank you. And I appreciate your time and listening to my presentation. So to start, could we have Professor Bong Won Kang from Gyeongju University report on the city of Gyeongju?
Hello. My presentation today is about tourism of Asia-Pacific World Heritage Cities in year of COVID-19. I'll be focusing on Gyeongju, Korea. Before I get started, let me talk a little bit about myself. My name is Bong Won Kang, and I'm an archaeologist. I have taught archaeology in the Department of Cultural Resources Studies at Gyeongju University for 20 years. I got retired at the end of February this year, but I'm still teaching 2 courses as a professor emeritus. Okay, we have 2 maps here. One red dot indicates the location, geographic location of Korea, and bottom map is for East and Northeast Asian countries like mainland China and North Korea and Republic of Korea and Japanese archipelago. Gyeongju is located southeastern part of Korean peninsula. Let me introduce you Gyeongju a little bit. The population size is about approximately 270,000. It has been decreasing every year. The total area is 1,324 square kilometers. Comparing to other big cities, it is a relatively small city in Korea, yet it is one of the most famous cities in the world. Cultural heritages in Gyeongju have been playing a critical role for tourists to visit the city. Gyeongju used to be the capital of Silla dynasty for nearly 1,000 years, between 57 BC to 936 AD. So a tremendous number of cultural heritages and archaeological sites are everywhere. It is like an outdoor museum. And there are lots of high-mounted tombs with brilliant artifacts. And the majority of cultural heritages are composed of barriers like high-mounted tombs and Buddhist sculptures, like temples and pagodas and Buddhist sculptures. This is a satellite picture of Gyeongju, and as I mentioned, it is a small country. According to scholars, in the past, about 700,000 or 800,000 people lived in Gyeongju, but it is hard to accept that theory. Gyeongju is surrounded by 3 different streams: East Stream and West Stream, and also South Stream. On the bottom of this picture, we can see a big mountain. It is called South Mountain. since it is located in the southern part of the city. In this mountain alone, there are a whole bunch of cultural heritages, lots of ruined Buddhist temples and pagodas and Buddhist sculptures. And also in Gyeongju, lots of architectural remains and also high-mounted tombs. At the beginning of Shilla dynasty, local residents built lots of barriers in downtown Gyeongju, but as the population size grew, they needed more residential areas. So mortuary behavior changed over time. So they began to build their barriers outskirts of Gyeongju city. So we can see a lot of barriers in those mountains in the vicinity of Gyeongju. This is called the Tumlai Park. This is located in downtown Gyeongju. This mortuary system has been classified as a stone-surrounded wooden chamber tomb. It is quite unique mortuary system. And these are high-mounted tombs, and some were excavated by Japanese scholars in the 1920s and 1930s. Some other high-mounted tombs were excavated by Korean archaeologists in 1970s. A couple of high-mounted tombs are still being excavated. And if you are going to come by, you can see the ongoing archaeological site. So this is like Heavenly Horse Tomb. They conducted excavation, this tomb. Now, let's go back to this picture again. In the early 1970s, President Park planned to make Gyeongju a world-famous tourism. So there were a lot of people lived around this Tumlai, so they were relocated elsewhere, and they decided to excavate one of the biggest high-mounted tombs. But at that time, Korean archaeologists did not have enough experience to excavate those kind of high-mounted tombs. So they selected one of the small high-mounted tombs for practice. So they excavated one located left-hand side. So they initiated that excavation in 1973. Surprisingly, that high-mounted tomb yielded a great number of artifacts like this. This is mudguard for horses recovered in Heavenly Horse Tomb in Tumlai Park. So since this artifact was discovered in the tomb is named as Heavenly Horse Tomb. Galloping white horse is painted on the birch bark. An artifact like this discovered in Heavenly Horse Tomb, like gold crown with lots of comma-shaped jade, and also gold belt with dangling pendant. And some other artifact like this, like inner cave of gold crown, and also even Roman glass was discovered in the tomb. So this is a good material evidence of long-distance trade. I do not think there was a direct connection between Shilla dynasty and Rome. Probably there was it is called down the line trade. Probably Shilla people went to Chang'an, China, and they purchased this kind of unique vessel. So other than this artifact, there were a great number of impressive artifacts. Okay, we see two sites here. One is called East Palace and Moon Pond, and another one, upper hand corner, is semi-lunar shaped fortress. It is looking like crescent. That is why the fortress is called semi-lunar shaped fortress. Probably king and the royal families and lots of aristocrats must have lived inside of that fortress. Down there, it's called East Palace and Moon Pond. Probably Crown Prince lived there. And also, when foreign envoys visited Shilla Kingdom, there were probably lots of parties there. And there are lots of mysterious monumental architectures in Gyeongju. This is called Cheomseongdae, or some people are arguing that this is an observatory station. Astronomers probably watched stars, but some other people are arguing that it's just a monumental architecture, and it is erected between 632 and 647, right before Shilla dynasty accomplished unification of three kingdoms. Okay, Shilla royal families built this kind of Buddhist temple in the middle of 8th century. It is called Bulguksa, and right-hand side we see Sakguram Kuroto. And this is one of the most popular places in Korea. And also, whenever foreign tourists are coming to Gyeongju, they never fail to visit this place. Two magnificent pagodas are located inside the Bulguksa temple. One is called Dabotap, which means multi-treasure pagoda, and another one is called Munyangtap, pagoda that casts no shadow. Gyeongju is home of tourism, so I've showed you some examples of cultural heritages located in Gyeongju city. And that is why Gyeongju became one of the most attractive cities in the world, and the majority of Korean people and foreigners have a strong desire to visit the city. For example, Gyeongju used to be #1 choice for honeymoon till 1970s. At that time, Korea was a very poor country, so people had not enough money to go abroad. And also, school excursion till the end of 20th century. Lots of school boys and girls came to Gyeongju to look around historical heritages. Indeed, a great number of tourists do still visit Gyeongju every year. Unfortunately, however, COVID-19 identified at the end of last year has been playing a decisive role for a dramatic decrease of the number of tourists in Gyeongju. Let us take a look at some graphs. Let us take a look at the statistics, how it changed over time in 2020. So, blue ones for 2019 and red one for 2020. As we can see, we see trimodal curves on both graphs. In 2019, like we have three peaks. One's in May, another one's in August, another one's in October. So spring is good season for tourists to come Gyeongju, so lots of people come. And in August, it is very hot and humid in Korea, but still lots of tourists are coming. In October, the best season in a year, so lots of tourists are coming. And if we are going to take a look at red line, still we are seeing the similar pattern, May and August, October. Like August, even in the middle of COVID-19, still a lot of tourists stopped by, and in October as well. But in general, the number of tourists dropped significantly. 2019, the number of tourists were a little more than 8.6 million. And this year, it was nearly 4.6 million people, so nearly 50% decreased. Okay, I took this picture on November 7th. It was Saturday afternoon. So it was in the middle of COVID-19, but it was a little bit better than other months. So a lot of people are coming to Gyeongju. I think this is a good sign. So my expectations, it is hard to know when COVID-19 will be over. As soon as this pandemic is over, however, tourists will certainly visit Gyeongju. Let us keep our fingers crossed for the termination of COVID-19 as soon as possible. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kang. Sorry for stepping in like that. We'll find another way in future. But really good outline in terms of some of the impacts of tourism on Gyeongju. And certainly, it's one place I hope to visit someday, especially with all the interesting sites you represented. But certainly, you've demonstrated the power of statistics and data to show how the city is being impacted and how it's being affected by the current strain of COVID-19 in the country. Our next presenter will be Ms. Laxmy Saraswaty, who's the head of Corporate Cooperation Division, Regional Secretariat of Denpasar City, and she will be representing Denpasar.
Okay, thank you very much. It's time for us to join on these sessions. The Honorable Mr. Hyungju, Mayor of Gyeongju, Mrs. Liminiadis, Interim Secretary General OWHC, Mrs. Hyeonji Oh as the Regional Coordinator of Organizations of World Heritage Cities Asia Pacific Regional Secretariat, Mr. Juan Carlo Medina as the Mayor of Vigan, and all panelists who have been joining these sessions. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome from Denpasar, Bali, Indonesia. Om Swastiastu. Salam peace upon you. I'm Laxmy Saraswaty as the head of the Cooperation Division of Denpasar City Government on behalf of the government of Denpasar City. At this present time, I would like to greet thanks to Asia and Pacific Organization of Heritage Cities to select Denpasar City as a part of these workshops to presenting New Normal Life, Heritage City, Productive, and a Safety COVID-19. So in these conditions of pandemic in Denpasar City tries hard to against COVID-19 in many ways to be done, but the life economic must run with how to protocol by productive and safety COVID-19. So we're going to start for New Normal Life Heritage City with the theme is Productive and Safety COVID-19. Okay, we talk about the position of Denpasar City, okay, as the centers of the government, trade, economic, tourism, education. So in this position, it's an intersection of the cross regions, which are populated by multi-ethnic and many countries caused to be susceptible of COVID-19. We know the total area of Denpasar is 127.78 kilometers, and the total area with the Bali province. They are divided into 27 villages and 16 administrative villages. So population in 2019, 947,100 inhabitants, a growth rate in 19.43%. And all the culture tourism incomes by the tourisms with the culture 30%. So when infectious of COVID-19 based on Health Ministry protocol in Bali province, how to handling COVID-19 with mitigation in the city or region in Bali based on authorities to keep coordination with the province. Next, we talk about the management performance target of COVID-19 in Denpasar city. Government of Denpasar they have 3 performances targets. These are limited social activities, public service implementations, on pandemic stations, social coverage with social safety net and soup kitchens, and the main for economic recovery is implementation of creative economic activities. And the purposing of policies which have been carried out, they are about supported by using information and technology, for example, like a website of Denpasar Safe City with the cases database, Sewakadharma application with the social coverage applications, public service application, and home shopping applications. Next. So this is the synergy of handling COVID-19, what we call Jaga Baya. Okay. Government of Denpasar City has issued of the Jaga Baya, synergy of handling COVID-19 in Denpasar City, with regulation number 32 year of 2020 about limited social activity for all people in Denpasar City, such as priority safety or healthy of the people, social safety net in the heat of the target. Economic sector can run well based on the HAP protocol, preparation of new normal lifestyle and HAP protocol, so combination and synergy of the government, culture village, society, and private entities. If we call about the culture village, so we say Jaga Bayan preservations, and the Baya is the disasters. Culture village is traditional community in Bali has big efforts to discourage in separating of COVID-19 in Denpasar city. For supported that policies or culture village in commitment to keep strict HAP protocol in your normal life adaptations. There are 410 arches or 100% of commitments to doing HAP protocol in managing COVID-19. So it is a base of the government, private sector, culture village, and the people, what we call Trihitakarana, people to people, people to earth, and people to God. Next. Optimization public service in pandemic COVID-19 session, where public service is pushed to make maximize and using application of the public service. If people need it in offline, must do strict HAP protocols. Department will give public service to apply one system such as permissions, civil registration, service tax, recommendation online, information web portal, and many other services. Next. Okay. We talk about the government of Denpasar policies have been carried out. Service offices apply public service by online registers. So department will give public service to apply online, what we call permission, civil registration, service tax, recommendation online, information web portals. Next. Employee absent attendance by location online this feature has been at application of working electronic, which used by employees to report daily working activities. This is used to make easier in supervisions. Employees performs when they are work from home and don't work from office. The public service must go on sustainable. Next. Okay, next, we recall about what's the task of monitoring and evaluations. Tamamaya establishment or Denpasar Cyber Monitor Central of Data, we supported by coordination COVID-19 mitigation as intersection of departments, and preparation of website COVID-19 and denpasarkota.go.id. Besides that, with the management of social distancing in public area, government hospital, community health center, village services, and all government service offices. Next. Offline services with strict health protocol, such as using hand sanitizers, shoe barrier, wearing masks, hand sanitizer available on the table, washing hands, temperature checks, and passing sterilization chamber for offline services who the people of Denpasar would like to make some permissions and registrations for the inhabitants. Next. And offline services for recovery of economy. So all the people or the services officers must do checking the temperature, because this is the pictures when the traditional market as a heritage city must do something for economic creative. They must do for wearing masks, temperature checks, and washing hands. Or the local police, what we call the Satpol PP, or local police in Denpasar with the Jagabaya systems, what we call the people of Denpasar must do strict protocol if do offline services. Next. This is one of the temple in Denpasar, close up to Denpasar, just only 0 kilometer of Denpasar city, close up to Mayor of Denpasar, Jagannatha temples. The people must do praying or must do entering the temple. We do something for social distancing, checking the temperatures, and priests wearing the mask, and all people who entering the temple must do strict protocols. Next. Talk about the tourism recovery. Tourism object management in type must apply to their place for cleanliness, health, sanitation, and environment. Don't forget, because Denpasar city source of the region income 30% from the tourism. Health protocol must be done in modern and heritage objects such as wearing masks, washing hands, and social distance. The Denpasar Government Tourism Office constantly to verify for 16 hotels in Denpasar city, which is based on standard health protocol and new tourist destinations. Tourism business must be controlled and will be standard operational procedures, document and simulation video attachment. Hopefully, activity of the tourism in Denpasar city can grow up in healthy protocols so times. Tourism stimulus of the Central Government Republic of Indonesia for the tourism business, which has been disrupting of pandemic COVID-19. It's named Tourism Grant Funds. Next. Recovery economy in Denpasar city supported in doing many activities of economic creative, such as many events in Denpasar city. They are economic creative webinar or virtual festivals, comics festivals, documentary movies festival, Denpasar Festival 2020 in virtual for 3 months, started on October to December. So we're going through in the 3rd month of Denpasar festivals. We will be end on 31st December 2020. Next. Okay. Recovery economy or creative economy. Started from the cooperation division of Regional Secretary of Denpasar City, Denpasar Festival 2020. We have International Friendship City Track Session agenda. We talk about the tourism, we talk about many things about the craft, about sharing session for sister cities that will be available for next year. For example, like Denpasar attend digital event on the covenant of ICMA with sharing session, what to do in the pandemic COVID-19. So we make some culture perform virtuals, openings, and other for International Friendship City Track Session agenda, collaboration with India, South Korea, Nansa, Vietnam, Darwin, Slops, and Brighton for the other countries. Next. Okay, for the last, we know COVID-19 never ending yet until the invasion of the version and medicine, but the society like must go on. New lifestyle adaptation by keep strict health protocol is a solution, being productive and safety management to fight COVID-19. About the public service continue to run should maybe accelerate online service and strict health protocol. So don't forget, strategy of economic creative preparation to accelerate economic recovery in Denpasar city. Those are all my presentations. We do hope this can be benefit for sharing together in this session of the workshops. Thank you very much.
Rima, can I say, Ms. Saraswaty, that is a very good representation of all the important initiatives that Denpasar is undertaking. So thank you for your efforts, and to you as well, and for the efforts of your colleagues in the municipal environment at Denpasar. Our next presenter will be His Honor, Mr. Juan Carlo Medina, who is the mayor of Vigan. And Your Honor, if you're able to present.
Thank you, sir. So for the presentation of Vigan, just like most of the cities in the world, Vigan, a World Heritage Site and a tourist destination, was not spared from the disruption and the serious threat because of the health, social, and economic emergency that COVID-19 pandemic has brought us. Unprecedented global travel restrictions and stay-at-home orders are causing the most severe disruption of the global economy. With travel bans affecting over 90% of the world population and widespread restrictions on public gatherings and community mobility, tourism largely ceased in early this year because of the virus. With this, tourism is especially susceptible to measures to counteract pandemics because of restricted mobility and social distancing. Vigan's tourism is as vibrant and colorful as its culture and heritage. Vigan relies much of its income from its tourism industry. It is the backbone of the city's economy. On the onset of the pandemic, Vigan's tourism sector is the hardest hit by the situation. Among all the sectors, the city's tourism has earlier experienced a rapid and sharp drop in demand and a surge in job losses even at a local level, putting many businesses, especially MSMEs, at risk. As early as January, we have already felt the emerging impact of this health situation. Though the country only had its first case in February, our city already felt a slender supply side impact, especially on tourism. Tourism-related businesses have most suffered, particularly food, accommodation, and tourist attractions. 158 hotels, 78 restaurants, 87 souvenir shops, 18 tourist attractions, and 157 Calles operators were forced to stop its operation due to the enhanced community quarantine in Luzon. While there is tourism's proven resilience in responses to other crises, the depth and breadth of the current pandemic will likely have a longer-lasting effect compared to the other industries. The uncertainty and decline in travel also led to people staying off work, losing income, and causing a fall in demand. The months of January to June would have been the peak season, but this year we have an estimated loss in gross income for tourism-related businesses of 495 million pesos from March to May alone. As of October, we had an estimated loss in gross income of 1.3 billion pesos based on 1,263 pesos average expenditure per tourist. As most of business establishments are required to close during the enhanced community quarantine in the Philippines, the pandemic has put up thousands of jobs in travel and tourism sector at risk, most likely to slump by a quarter this year. In the city, 68% of the total businesses had to stop operating because of guidelines and restrictions during the quarantine. Sadly, there are still business owners who are already allowed to operate during the gradual lifting of the quarantine, but still choose to close their establishments because of the virus scare. These circumstances also led to decrease of income for the people of Vigan, unemployment because of establishments that are still closed, and those that laid off employees, and generally a significant impact on the economic situation of the city. With this, the city multiplied its efforts in providing services to the people, despite the threats of the pandemic. At the onset of the pandemic, the city created its local COVID task force team. This included representatives from various offices of the executive branch, including the legislative and its attached agencies. Through the task force, the city was able to enact policies and implement guidelines and protocols that protected and secured these people from the threat of COVID and helped them recover from economic losses. Concurrently, city resources were utilized to cater to the public. City bus and all other government vehicles of the city operated as service vehicles for household members who needed to do essential errands. Enforcers manned the border checkpoints and monitor all the entrances and exits of the city. The city government extended assistance to those who are greatly affected, particularly the displaced workers. A one-time financial assistance of 4,000 pesos was given to displaced workers, tricycle and kalesa drivers affected by the quarantine. Business owners who are allowed to operate are required to undergo orientation on minimum health standards for business establishment conducted by the City Health Office as prerequisite for operation. Since the city's COVID policies were in place, the city was able to continue its health services amidst the pandemic. Health workers conducted house-to-house immunization for pregnant women and babies, and food packs such as eggs and vegetables were distributed to lactating mothers and undernourished children. The city's Social Welfare and Development Office, in partnership with the Daycare Parents Association, proceeded with their feeding program by distributing nutritious home-cooked meals to preschool children. Likewise, services for the elderly did not cease. Flu vaccination for elderly was launched, and the provision of assistive devices were maintained. Livelihood trainings, core shelter assistance, and the distribution of livelihood support were resumed through the interagency cooperation. Other services of offices in the city are also continuously conducted with compliance of the strict health protocols. Since heritage has always been the initiating factor that started progress in Vigan, it will continue to be an important factor in our recovery and rebuilding our city after the pandemic. As before, we have always inculcated to the citizenry that our heritage is the key in advancing the city. Heritage preservation became a constant consideration in all of the government's efforts. Because of this, the city was able to thrive on its heritage, particularly in progressing our tourism industry. We still ensure that the citizenry, despite the challenges we are facing, understand the importance of our heritage, which will still be the binding factor in ensuring that the city gets back on its feet. The City Transition Team, which includes the Cultural Affairs and Tourism Office of the city, created a recovery plan that would help all sectors to bounce back on track, especially the most affected sector, the tourism industry. The road to recovery for the tourism sector aims to restore the interest of tourists in Vigan, reestablish confidence amidst the pandemic scare, revitalize tourism programs anchored on heritage conservation, and lastly, to revive the economy. The city government is also looking into ways to help our people affected in the tourism sector. Programs and activities are being discussed and ironed out for implementation, such as provisions of loans to small and medium-scale enterprises to help them augment their losses during the pandemic. Aside from MSME loans, moratoriums on rent, tax reduction incentive schemes, and such other financial assistance are granted to them. We also give financial assistance to tourism-related workers and assist them in finding other means of earning for their families. The legislative branch, on the other hand, enacted the tax reduction scheme for affected business owners, particularly the tourism-related establishments. Continuous consultation and orientation on food, accommodation, and other tourism-related establishments are being conducted not only to inform them of the protocols and guidelines they need to adhere to on their operation, but also to assure them of the support and help they need in recovering from the impact of the pandemic. To ensure that minimum standard protocols are always observed in the establishments, regular monitoring are conducted by the city composite team. To ease the burden of the business owners, the City Tourism Office assisted them in any way they can, such as providing assistance for their DOT accreditation. Heritage conservation, being one of the pillars of the city's development, cannot be compromised as we are doing efforts to help the tourism sector through heritage-based strategies in rebuilding cities to be more sustainable, more resilient, and more deeply connected to our histories. Related seminars and trainings are done through webinars, contact lens consultations, and online submission of requirements and payments. Furthermore, safeguarding the intangible and tangible heritage is still one of the priorities through the continuous implementation of the existing ordinances and laws on heritage preservation and the conservation guidelines with the efforts of the Vigan Conservation Council. Due to uncertainty of the period of travel bans, closures and restrictions to mass gatherings, the City Events and Promotion Office are doing alternative strategies and scenarios in celebrating city events and festivals such as online competitions and activities. Preparations have been made for the opening of tourism in the city under the Reach and Reef Travel Corridor Program of the Department of Tourism of Region 1, including guidelines for tourists, modified tours, and implementation of minimum health standards to the tourist destinations. We also took this time during the quarantine to clean, repair, and prepare tourism sites for the gradual reopening of the city to tourists and visitors. Collaborations are already in place as we are already tapping agencies or organizations that can partner with us in providing trainings, webinars, and startup kits or other needed incentives for the local industry to thrive once more. In the previous years, the local industry has been contented in maintaining souvenir shops locally as well as supplying other local shops. Income from tourist influx has always been enough, but because of the pandemic, the industry cannot rely on local residents alone. With this, the city government implemented measures to help the people by providing options for the local industry players. We are exploring possibilities and shifts its prioritization to progress the local industry to compensate for the loss that the pandemic had caused. As part of the recovery plan for our traditional industry, means of helping them market their products are also at work. The local government highly encourages people to support and buy local products through various platforms such as social media campaigns, while helping our key players market their products in the digital platform. Collaborating with other industries are considered. The income from the sale of the products will not only augment the industry, but it will be an effective tool to promote the city and to revive the interest of the people, whether local or tourists, in our heritage. The COVID-19 virus is challenging the world. This pandemic may be far from over, but for a city like ours, the heritage city of Vigan is and will always be an example of cooperation between local communities to ensure the safety and health of every Viganyo while we continue to preserve its intangible and tangible heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's impressive to see the leadership and the coming together of your community to help support the health and well-being of the people in Vigan, and at the same time taking the opportunity that, if you will, from this crisis to help restore and preserve the city as well. So congratulations to you and your team for moving forward on these important initiatives to help your fellow citizens and the historic fabric of the city. Well done. We have time for questions. And in fact, I have 4 questions in front of me. And because, Mr. Mayor, I can see you on my screen, I'm going to ask you the first question. This is one that was posed from Denpasar to Your Honor. And I'll ask you the first question. So, does the existence of COVID-19 make competition between business actors in the tourism sector tighter? Actually, this will force business actors to do everything they can, including lowering market prices, right? Supply is a lot rather than demand for the tourism industry. Furthermore, the situation is projected. The tourism will return to, like in 2019, in between 2.5 to 4 years. So the key question is, does the existence of COVID-19 make competition between business actors in the tourism sector tighter? Obviously, everyone's trying to go for that all-important tourism peso. And how do you see that occurring in your city?
Actually, sir, it's actually occurring right now in the city because of the limited number of tourists coming inside. The hotels are actually slashing their prices as a means to encourage tourists to stay at their places. We are talking to them, we are talking with the association, not to basically price gouge each other, resulting in, instead of earning for them, which would be rather better for us, they actually have thinner margins from their earnings. It's still constant communication, it's constant dialogue with them, encouraging them to, as an organization, as an association, to talk within each other and to minimize competition, especially during these times. We are actually encouraging our tourism tour agencies to spread out the tourists in most of our hotels, giving them incentives on how to better serve our hotel operators, including our Kales operators, the horse-drawn carriage, our souvenir shops. We are encouraging them to spread out also the tourists coming into within the city.
Great. Thank you for your response. That's very helpful. I'm glad to see you taking those kinds of initiatives to support the different businesses that are there. It's when everyone has to come together at this time, as you correctly figured out with your tourism partners. This is a question from Professor Park to the city of Denpasar. So, Ms. Saraswaty, how do you manage sustained heritage sites during the pandemic? What will be the priorities of tourism development after COVID-19?
Okay, thank you for the questions. We know that Denpasar City will, on our presentation, the Heritage City, heritage site or cultural heritage in Bali, especially the city of Denpasar, are living monuments or are still living, being used by the people who own them as religious activities. One of them is like the temples, the pictures that we saw together on the presentation. So the management is running as usual, especially in terms of utilization, in terms of development. Sites are used spiritual social background after the pandemic. And the addition, heritage site is completed by the protocols, including the manager of heritage site. Example, the Jagannath temple to close up Denpasar City. When the priest is wearing mask and the prayer who entering the temple must check the temperature. All the system, what we call inherited gigabyte, in the systemic handling COVID-19, not just on the online of the public service, but on the heritage campaign sites and artists. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very good to see those kinds of initiatives underway, and certainly control measures still, as you know, the pandemic is obviously evident in many communities around the globe. So thank you. I'll throw in a question for Professor Kang, because I'd like to also hear his response as well. Professor Kang, how, given the past tourism that has taken place at Gyeongju, how would you like to see tourism at Gyeongju develop or evolve post-pandemic?
At the very beginning of this COVID situation, Gyeongju was one of the most dangerous places in Korea, but it is much better now. So as I talked about in my presentation, a lot of people have a strong desire to come to Gyeongju for sightseeing, and also like spending some time in Gyeongju is like healing place. Healing place. Gyeongju is kind of healing place. So Gyeongju city government are trying to make this city clean out of COVID-19. So I still do expect that a lot of tourists will be coming to Gyeongju, and also city officials are doing their best to control the infected people, and also they are sending, by using this smartphone, they let Gyeongju citizens to know what's going on with COVID-19 every day. So I think everything is under control in terms of COVID-19. So as I said before, people have a strong desire to come to Gyeongju to begin with. So I showed you a picture of traffic jam in November 7th. So a lot of people are ready to come to Gyeongju anytime, as soon as this COVID is over. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would certainly like to come to Gyeongju myself someday.
Yeah, please do come. Yeah.
I would be happy to
Let me
do
know
so,
in
believe me.
advance. Yeah, I'll treat you out.
I would be happy to eat some bulgogi or do some other sort of activities with you.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I'd be happy
Yes.
to do so.
Yeah.
So I think that, we have about a few minutes left. Are there any final comments from our panelists? Hyungyu, would you have anything you wanted to add or anything to say as we wrap up?
Not really, but I have been quite impressed by both cities of Vigan and Denpasar, how they have successfully managed to get through this crisis, but at the same time, the hopeful messages of rebuilding tourism industry through heritage or community-based participation after COVID-19. So I really hope tourism will be different in this region. And then tourism just shouldn't be regarded as just money-making businesses, as more of a means to understand, each other and then interact with each other. So hopefully that will be our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hyungyu. Ms. Saraswaty, Mr. Mayor, Professor Gang, do you have anything to say? Someone's waving their hand, and that must be Hyungji, who's probably going to say we're not allowed to talk too much more. Is that correct?
Yes. Actually, in line with Ms. Park's comment, I was really impressed too by the vegan cities handling with this situation, because I have visited vegan city for like 2 or 3 times in the past, and in the yesterday session, the experts said that this time should be the time for the recovery and resilience for the World Heritage Cities in terms of every aspects for the World Heritage Cities. And already Vigan is doing that by remodeling and repainting and doing something new and for the tourist, a future tourist. So I was really impressed, and it's really a good thing to learn to other World Heritage cities in Asia Pacific who are in the same situation as well. So we hope that every World Heritage cities regard this time as a hopeful time of our generation to recover from this pandemic, and I hope this outcome of this workshop could be a starting point of that part of our life. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyungji. Thank you, all the presenters, and to everyone in Gyeongju who made a very important contribution to extending the knowledge and thinking with regard to trying to rejuvenate, recover tourism for all the World Heritage cities. So thank you for all of your efforts.
Okay, can I take the floor now? Yeah, I want to close. Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Maclaren for chairing this session. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone to participate in this workshop. As our World Heritage cities are facing biggest challenge these days, I hope this workshop could be the starting point of meaningful discussions among Asia Pacific World Heritage cities to overcome this pandemic. Thank you so much for your participation. And we will be upload this edited version of our workshop on our website and General Secretariat's website along with our documents about in 2 weeks. So we will send the URLs to your mails so that you could upload or use it for your World Heritage cities in your region or country. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well.
안녕.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hearing you.